The music stopped before I even realized my hand was still resting on her waist. Every mask in that vast golden hall turned toward us at once, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I had been on this planet for 6 months. I had learned the rules. I had learned to keep my head down, to speak only when spoken to remember that humans were the newest and smallest voice in a galaxy full of empires older than our written history. And yet here I was, standing in the middle of the Threnvain imperial court, holding the hand of a woman whose face the entire palace had just seen for the first time in 9 years. My name is Callan Reeve. I was, until that night, a junior attaché for the human delegation on Threnvain Prime, the capital world of an empire that had existed for longer than humanity had known fire. I was not important. I was not supposed to be important. I was supposed to stand near the wall, smile politely, and make sure no one from Earth caused an incident during the one night a year when every noble house in the empire gathered under a single roof. That night was the Masquerade of Ashes, held once every generation, when the entire nobility wore masks that hid their faces, their ranks, and their bloodlines. For one evening, dukes could speak to servants without either knowing it, and enemies could dance together without either raising a blade. It was supposed to be a night of equality, a night where titles disappeared, and only people remained. I was told 3 times before I entered that hall not to dance with anyone. Not because it was forbidden, but because I would have no way of knowing who I was dancing with. A farmer's daughter and an empress could be standing 2 feet apart, wearing identical silver masks, and I would never know the difference until it was too late. I should have listened. The hall itself was unlike anything I had seen since arriving on Threnvain Prime. Endless columns of pale blue stone rose toward a ceiling painted with the birth of stars, and thousands of small floating lights drifted above the crowd like slow, silent fireflies. The nobles moved in long, flowing robes, their faces hidden behind masks carved from polished shell, bone, and metal, each one more beautiful than the last. I stood near the edge of the room in my simple black formal wear, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. And then she walked up to me. She wore a mask of pale silver, shaped like something between a bird and a flame, with 2 thin lines of gold running from her temples down to her jaw. Her eyes, visible through the mask's narrow openings, were a shade of violet I had never seen on a human face, and yet something about the way she tilted her head made her feel completely familiar. She did not bow. She did not offer the traditional Threnvain greeting. She simply held out her hand. I should have declined. Every instinct trained into me by my superiors told me to step back, to make an excuse, to disappear into the crowd. Instead, I took her hand. The music that filled the hall was unlike any I had heard before, a slow rising melody played on instruments I could not name, and she led me into the open floor, as if she had done this with me 100 times before. Her steps were confident but strange, testing my movements, adjusting to mine, as though she were studying me rather than simply dancing with me. We were not supposed to speak. Masquerade custom forbade names, titles, and any mention of rank. But she spoke anyway, her voice low and careful, as if she were choosing each word with great precision. "You dance like someone who is always watching the exits," she said. I told her that where I came from, that was simply called being careful. "And where do you come from, careful one?" she asked. I told her about Earth, about a small blue planet with more oceans than land, about a species that had only just begun reaching for the stars a few short decades ago. She listened as though I were describing something impossible. Most Threnvain nobles I had met treated humanity the way one might treat a clever animal, something to be observed with mild curiosity but never taken seriously. She did not look at me that way. She looked at me the way someone looks at a puzzle they suddenly want very badly to solve. "Why do your people run toward danger?" she asked, instead of away from it. I laughed before I could stop myself. It was the first real laugh I had allowed myself in months. "Maybe because running away never actually made the danger go away," I said. "It only made it someone else's problem." She was quiet for a moment, and something about her posture shifted, as though my answer had touched a memory she had not expected to revisit that night. "I have heard that humans fought in the border conflict near the Vaith Expanse 9 years ago," she said. "I have heard it changed the way some of the older houses think of your people. I told her I did not know much about that. I had only been a teenager when it happened, watching grainy news reports about a human fleet answering a distress call from a species we had never met, deep in territory that was not ours to defend. It had been one of humanity's first real steps onto the galactic stage, though I had always heard it described as a minor rescue operation, nothing more. She did not respond to that. Instead, she asked me to spin her, and I did, and for a few seconds, the entire golden hall around us blurred into streaks of light and color, and I forgot that I was supposed to be careful. It was somewhere in that spin that I noticed the whispers beginning. At first I thought I was imagining it, a trick of the strange acoustics in that enormous hall, but as the dance continued, I saw more and more masked heads turning toward us, saw small clusters of nobles leaning close to murmur to one another in a formal dialect I only partially understood. I caught fragments, words like impossible, and she does not dance, and who allowed the human this close. I asked her if she noticed it too. She smiled beneath her mask. I could tell by the way her eyes changed shape. They notice everything here, she said. It means nothing. But it did mean something, because a few moments later, a tall figure in a deep red mask, shaped like a hooked blade, stepped directly into our path, forcing the dance to stop. The music did not stop yet, but everyone near us had already gone still, watching. The figure in red spoke in a voice dripping with quiet contempt, addressing her directly, though he never once looked at me, as if I were beneath his notice entirely. "You dishonor this night by touching outsider hands," he said. "If you wish to continue this display, then by the old custom, you and your partner must prove your worth before this court, or remove your masks and answer for it." I did not fully understand the old custom he was referring to, but I understood the tone. I understood the way the crowd around us had grown thicker, hungrier, waiting for something to happen. I understood that whoever this woman was, exposing her would cause her real harm, and that whoever I was, exposing me, would simply confirm every quiet insult the galaxy already believed about humanity. I made a decision in that moment that I still cannot fully explain, except to say that it felt like the only decision worth making. I reached up and removed my own mask first. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd immediately surrounding us. Masks were rarely removed voluntarily, and never by someone of no significant rank, in front of a challenge like this. I heard someone gasp. I heard someone else laugh softly, as though I had just made a foolish mistake that would cost me everything. My face, plain and human, and utterly unremarkable by Threnvane standards, was now visible to everyone nearby. I looked at the man in the red mask and told him, as calmly as I could manage, that I was simply a guest who had been asked to dance, and that whatever custom he was invoking, it should fall on me and not on her. For a moment, nothing happened. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Then she reached up, slowly, and removed her mask as well. I do not know if she did it to protect me, or because she refused to let me stand exposed alone, or because something in her had simply decided the mask no longer mattered. But when the silver, bird-shaped mask came away from her face, the entire golden hall went utterly, completely silent. I did not understand why at first. Her face was beautiful. Yes, striking in a way that made my chest tighten. But I did not recognize her, and for a moment, I assumed the silence was simply shock, that a human had been dancing so closely with someone of clear high nobility. Then I heard someone near me whisper a name, and the whisper spread outward through the crowd like ripples across still water, faster and faster, until the entire hall seemed to be repeating it in hushed, disbelieving tones. Princess Cerelia. I felt the blood leave my face. I had heard that name before, in briefing documents I had barely paid attention to during my first weeks on Threnvane Prime. The Emperor's only daughter, presumed lost 9 years earlier during the very border conflict near the Vaith Expanse that she had mentioned only minutes before. Her transport had vanished during an attack, and after months of searching, the Imperium had declared her dead. It had been a national tragedy, mourned for years, spoken of only in careful, respectful tones by anyone who worked within the palace. And now she stood in front of me, mask in hand, very clearly alive. The man in the red mask took a step backward, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by something closer to fear. The crowd around us parted in a wide circle, no one daring to move closer, no one daring to speak. Even the strange floating lights above us seemed to dim slightly, as though the entire hall itself was holding its breath. She did not look afraid. She looked, if anything, exhausted, as though she had been carrying an enormous weight for a very long time and had just finally set it down in front of everyone who mattered. "I am not dead," she said simply, her voice carrying easily through the silent hall. "I was rescued 9 years ago, during the Vaith conflict, by a fleet that was never supposed to be there, from a species most of you have spent the last decade calling primitive and unworthy of respect." She turned slightly, gesturing toward me, though I still had no idea what she meant. "I have spent 9 years in hiding," she continued, "protected by people who owed me nothing, because the ones who attacked my transport were never fully identified, and because certain members of this very court benefited greatly from my absence." A new kind of silence fell over the hall then, heavier than before, and I noticed several masked nobles shifting uncomfortably, glancing toward one another with something that looked very much like guilt. "I did not know any of this," she added, looking directly at me now, "until the moment you told me your people run toward danger instead of away from it. I did not know, until tonight, that the fleet who found me drifting in the wreckage of my transport, who gave me shelter, who asked for nothing in return, was human." I felt something cold and enormous settle in my chest. I remembered, faintly, hearing about a rescue during the Vaith conflict, a small human patrol vessel that had picked up survivors from a destroyed transport and quietly handed them off to Allied forces before continuing on its way, never learning who exactly they had saved. It had been treated as a minor footnote in our own history, a brief moment of decency in an otherwise chaotic conflict. I had never imagined it might have saved an empire's heir. The doors at the far end of the hall opened before I could gather my thoughts, and the Emperor himself entered, flanked by a dozen guards in ceremonial armor, his own mask already removed, his face pale with disbelief. He crossed the enormous hall faster than I thought someone of his age and stature should have been able to move, and when he reached her, he simply stopped, staring at her, as though she might vanish if he blinked. "Cerelia," he said quietly, and the single word carried more weight than anything spoken in that hall all evening. She stepped forward and embraced him, and for a moment, I felt like an intruder witnessing something far too private for a room full of strangers. But no one moved, no one looked away. The entire court stood frozen, watching a reunion none of them had believed was possible. When the Emperor finally released her, he turned toward me, and I felt every eye in that enormous hall shift in the same direction. I did not know what to say. I was a junior attaché from a species most of these people considered barely civilized, standing in the middle of their most sacred night, having just been publicly connected to the return of their long-lost heir. I bowed as respectfully as I knew how, and said nothing, because I genuinely did not trust myself to speak without saying something foolish. The Emperor studied me for a long moment, then turned to address the entire hall, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly still moving through him. 9 years ago, he said, this court mourned a loss it believed was permanent, and in that mourning, many of us allowed old prejudices to grow louder than they should have. We spoke of the human species as though they were beneath our consideration, unworthy of true partnership among the stars. Tonight, I have learned that it was a human fleet, expecting nothing and knowing nothing of who they saved, that returned my daughter to the possibility of coming home. He paused, looking around at the silent crowd, many of whom would not meet his gaze. "Let it be known throughout this empire," he continued, "that the species we so easily dismissed acted with more honor in a single moment than many houses in this very hall have shown in years of careful political maneuvering. This will not be forgotten." I do not remember exactly what happened in the minutes after that. I remember Cerelia standing beside me, her hand briefly finding mine again, though this time it felt less like a dance and more like gratitude. I remember the murmurs in the crowd, slowly shifting from suspicion to something closer to curiosity, even respect, as nobles who had ignored me all evening suddenly seemed eager to learn my name. I remember the man in the red mask disappearing quietly through a side door, never to be seen again that night, and I remember hearing, weeks later, that his house had lost a significant amount of standing within the court following the events of that evening. Mostly, I remember standing in that golden hall, surrounded by an empire far older and more powerful than my own species had ever imagined encountering, and realizing that everything I had been taught about staying small, about keeping my head down, about being careful not to matter, had led me directly into the center of something enormous. I left Threnvane Prime a few months later, transferred back to a more senior diplomatic post, one that no longer required me to stand quietly near the walls of a room. Word of that night had spread quickly through the Empire, and though the full story was rarely told with complete accuracy, the core of it remained the same everywhere I went. A human had danced with a woman he did not recognize, had shielded her without knowing who she was, and had been present for a reunion that reshaped how an entire empire viewed a species they had once dismissed without a second thought. I still think about that night often. I think about the way she asked why humans run toward danger instead of away from it, and I think about how strange it is that such a simple question, asked by a stranger in a silver mask, ended up changing far more than either of us could have understood in that moment. I never expected humanity's first real introduction to galactic politics to happen on a dance floor. But looking back, I have come to believe that some of the most important moments in history do not begin with speeches or treaties or grand declarations. Sometimes they begin much smaller than that. Sometimes they begin with a hand extended in the middle of a crowded room and a choice to take it.